Okay, I am going to start our webinar.
Okay.
Okay, we are going to get going. And if you're watching on Facebook, again, hello, and thanks for joining us. And if you are just coming on to our Zoom, hello, welcome, good morning. What is the day today? Today is December 2nd, and it's Wednesday. We're actually back on a Wednesday. We've been doing our webinars all over since I returned to air traffic control. So we've been all over the map with these webinars, which is a little not great, but it's okay. And but so we're back on Wednesday. We used to do Wednesday webinars at 11 o'clock, and so December 2nd. Back on a Wednesday. We're into December. I can't even believe that we're actually in December now. This is crazy. In December, and we're still in COVID. Like,
Yeah, it's wild.
who knew? Who knew in
That is wild.
January, right? Who knew? Who thought in
Yeah.
January that the next January would be here in COVID? Well, again, thank you all for joining us on this episode of Elevate Aviation's Airtime. I am your host, Kendra Kincaid, and I am just thrilled to have our guest on today. We're talking about gaslighting in the workplace, and maybe you've never heard of gaslighting. I haven't heard of the word gaslighting used for this particular area until recently. So when I heard, I was like, oh, we have to talk about this and gaslighting in the workforce. So I just want to say, though, we are really excited that our podcast is going to be launching pretty soon. So all our previous episodes of Airtime will be on a podcast. And going forward, we're still going to do our webinars, but we're also going to be having them on a podcast as well. So if you're interested in us contacting you to get you on there, it's info@elevateaviation.ca. We'll put you on the list. Otherwise, we'll be going live, I think, maybe next week. We'll be launching that podcast. So very excited about that. And again, let's get going. Welcome to Airtime. So, gaslighting in the workplace.
Yeah.
Are your coworkers just competitive, or is someone gaslighting you? Being made to feel like you're always wrong or your options don't count in the workplace can cause big issues and big stress. Learning more about gaslighting can help you identify and cope with this behavior. As I said, I haven't heard of gaslighting before, like all that long ago. And there's an organization called the DWAO. You're going to find out what that is. And they had Emily on talking about gaslighting. And so I thought, you know what? We need to have Emily on to talk about gaslighting. And she was talking about more as it relates to domestic violence. But I want to talk about, maybe we'll touch on that today, Emily, but maybe,
Mhm.
we're going to talk about it and how it relates to the workforce. So my guest today is Emily Ryman. I'm going to correct myself. My guest today is Corporal
Oh,
Emily Ryman.
thank
She's the Four Wings Defense Advisory Organization's military co-chair, and she's the Combat Operations Center coordinator at Four Wing Cold Lake, one of my favorite places in the entire world, Cold Lake, Alberta, and the military up there. Emily, I can't thank you enough for coming on and educating us about this subject. Thank you for being
oh,
here
thank you.
today.
Thank you for having me.
Wow. Okay, first, before we get into gaslighting,
Mhm.
let's figure out who you are.
Yes.
So, and I just want to say, if anyone's watching here on Zoom, for everyone who's watching, please feel free to ask questions through this. There's a chat button. Ask away with your questions, and I'll ask Emily them for you, because this might be new for you too. I'm not sure if this is a new subject for everyone who's watching or if you all know what it is, but let's explore. So, Emily, let's start with what you're doing. You're a Combat Operations Center coordinator up at
Yeah.
Four Wing Cold Lake.
Mhm.
What is that for our people interested in careers? What is that, and what do you do?
Right. So it is the Wing Operations Center on the base. So we deal with all the aircrafts that are coming into the base, that are leaving the base, any kind of logistical support that goes through the aircrafts there. And we also deal with the NORAD operations. So um, like with the Russians coming down, we deal with all the intercepts that happen with that. So it's kind of a very neat job. We have a lot on the go. I love operations. I deployed twice, and each of them was an operational tour that was in an ops center. So I absolutely love this job. It changes every single day. Some days it's super, super busy, and other days you're just, waiting for something to happen. But that's what we do there.
I need to take notes. I have so many
Yeah,
questions that just popped in my head. I'm like,
of
oh
course.
no. Where did you deploy to?
I deployed to Kuwait, and I also deployed to Romania.
And how can you talk about it at all? Like, what did you
Yeah.
do and what was it like? And And then I'm always curious about the whole female male thing. Like, how many
Mhm.
women were there with you? And tell me about it.
Yeah, so Kuwait was my first deployment. It was 8 months long, and it was a surprise to me. I thought it was supposed to be 6, and then when I arrived, they're like, "Wow, like 8 months here, hey?" So, oh, okay. But it was incredible. I've never felt heat like that before. I got up to 50, and I can't even begin to tell you how hot it was. And
50 in all your uniform, like
yes,
you're not in shorts and a tank top, like.
no, no. um, but that was an experience for sure. I was in the Joint Operations Center there as well, so dealing with very similar things that we are doing actually back home. So doing all the operations of the base itself, and so dealing with the transient aircrafts coming in, the logistical support, personnel support when they come in, and then also any kind of like refueling taskings for the aircrafts that are flying. So it was very, very neat. And
Wow. And the
yeah,
other one?
so the other one was Romania. I actually just came home in January, which feels like, oh my goodness, it feels like forever ago, but it was this year. So that was about 4 months. And that was also in the operations center as well. And we were doing a little more of what we actually do in Canada in terms of the NORAD operations. So it was, or sorry, it would be more NATO with them, but it was very similar to our response that we have back in Canada. So doing intercepts as well up there. And we also did the same thing with the operations support, but it was very, very fun working with the Romanians, and just making those national relationships was just terrific. So I really, really enjoyed that deployment.
So how many women were over there? And is that even a factor?
No, honestly, it wasn't a factor at all when we were engaging with the Romanians. They just, saw us as the Canadians, so it was pretty neat. There really wasn't many women. When I'm trying to think of the numbers, I honestly can't think offhand, but I want to say there was about 10 out of approximately 100. It was something like that. Like there really wasn't many of us. And in Kuwait, same thing. I remember we had. Signs on the doors that were for like female washrooms, but they were always being used by the men because there was just so many men, and
Right.
they were lining up out the door for the showers. So
So
yeah,
it's the opposite of every washroom that we
yeah,
ever have. If you go to a hockey game or anything else, where the
yeah.
women's washrooms lined up around the corner, like the men, there's no one
So
in
we're just
the
walking in. Like that's how it feels.
men.
Yeah.
Wow. So are you allowed to talk about NORAD at all? Like, anything I ask you, if you can't talk about it, or you'll have to kill me, please don't. But what is it like with NORAD? So for people who don't understand anything about that, or that there's, aircraft, I know from the air traffic control side that there's aircraft that come over from Russia, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden these guys go from Cold Lake. Can you talk about that at all and what your role is in that?
Yeah, so I can talk about my role, what I do in order to like facilitate an intercept, but anything past that, if it's in the news, then I could talk about it, but if not, no. But yes, you're absolutely right. So when the Russians come in into our airspace, then we are obligated to go and intercept those aircrafts. So we'll send up our assets. And so part of my job is responding to that phone call that comes from North Bay. So they'll say, it's time to intercept. They use a lot of different words, but that's in essence what it is. And then my job is to facilitate that intercept. So getting people ready to go and making the announcements for it. And then, they do their thing.
So are you saying you're the one who rings the bell, puts the
Yes.
siren on?
Yeah, I hit that siren. Yeah. Hit the siren, make a PA, and then, the pilots go from there and they do the best job ever. So
So when you're up at Cold Lake, if that's happening, if the Russians are coming and that's happening, is
yeah.
that sort of something that gets announced? I've never been up Cold Lake when anything like that's happened. So
Mhm.
is that something that sort of like something go like I picture in movies back in the day when, something happened in the city, the big, is that what happens up in Cold Lake, or is it like how
No.
does the alarm go off?
It's a little more quiet, yeah, like, it'll go off for them, but it won't go off base wide. But, after the fact, it does show up in the news, and then they'll give, like, a little debrief about what happened, and it's great. I mean, they do incredible work, so the pilots here are incredibly experienced in what they do very well. So, it's always great to hear about what they've done after the fact, and huge kudos to them because, oh my goodness, that's a quick thing. They gotta get on the ball, right? Get dressed and go, so it's pretty
Wow.
neat.
So exciting. So my time with the military, I've been in the military for about, as you know, 2.5 years.
Yes.
It's 3 years, term's coming to an
Yes.
end in October. So as an honorary colonel, and one day we're going to get an honorary colonel panel on here because I really love to share the amazing job that is the honorary colonel job.
Yeah.
But the men and women that I've met since I've been involved with the military, oh, so incredible. So
Yeah.
like all of them, like I haven't met anyone who's not just a fantastic individual and seems to be so, I don't know, there's something about the people I've met that maybe it's because I'm involved with the search and rescue squadron as well, but it's
Mhm.
like they're so giving and they're so all about really serving and protecting
Yes.
Canadians.
Yeah,
So
just so passionate, right? And I think that's
yeah.
what makes them so amazing at what they do is they're just, oh, and you can hear them now. But I actually live on the
Oh, is
base.
that the
So
F-18?
yeah, I live right on the base, so you can see them go over their path when they're leaving the ramp there. So it's kind of cool.
That is really cool. That is really
Yeah.
cool. Well, I will say on behalf of everybody that's watching and everyone else in the world, thank you for serving.
Okay.
It's amazing, and everyone appreciates it. And I know sometimes that only happens on Remembrance Day that you get that thanks, but thank you from all of
Oh, thank
us
you
for
so much. I
serving.
appreciate that.
So, okay, let's now move on to another subject. And then Perry, I'm going to get to your comment here shortly. The DWAO.
Yes.
Okay, so I was thrilled when I first heard about this, and talk about it. Talk
Hmm.
about your role.
Yes.
What is it?
Hmm.
And then we'll talk about why it's important.
Okay, absolutely. So
Okay.
the DWO is the Defense Women's Advisory Organization. There's one on every single base across Canada, and then it's also nationally located in Ottawa. So what the DWO seeks to do is we are advisors to the chain of command about systemic issues that have arisen about women, but it also falls into human issues as well. We also include men's issues, but we also include LGBTQ plus community as well. They're actually getting a new LGBTQ plus group that's going to be falling under the equity groups, which is amazing. So that's one of our, it's not our initiative, but it's something new for us as a whole, which is so exciting. But yeah, so the DWO, we raise women's issues and anything that's kind of a roadblock to women's success in the military. And we have civilians, we have military, of course, D&D employees, and we also have males and females. And it's all ranks as well, which is incredible. So we have NCMs, officers, the lower ranks, we have higher ranks. It's just an array of people a part of this team. But the thing is, every single person that's on the team is passionate. And that's what makes it so incredible because they want to be there and they want to see change. So I love being a part of this team. I started off as a member when I first came to Cold Lake. So I've been here for 6 years now, not counting. And
6 years, 3 days,
and,
2 hours.
just saying. But yes, so I've been on the team for that amount of time, and then this past year I was nominated as the military co-chair, which has been honestly an honor to work alongside these incredible people. So
The day I was up there, what I really loved, I was invited to this DWAO. I was expecting a room full of women,
yes,
and there was men in there, and the men were
yes,
so involved in the conversation. And one of
mhm,
the things that I really got from the men talking was hearing from the men about how they can feel alone, and they can feel like they can't express their feelings, and just how they feel, and that they were so willing to share in that environment. I
yes.
thought was so good, because that's all it's about, don't you think,
Mhm.
about trying to get everyone to kind of be honest and share and be kind.
Yeah. No,
you
that's
know
exactly it. And just have a safe place to be vulnerable. And I think that's the part that I value the most is I feel like the members they have a space that they can talk and there's not going to be any judgment. And I agree. It's absolutely wonderful hearing the male perspective because it comes from a place of wanting to know what they can do to help. And you may have like heard that from a few of the men when at that meeting, they had just said like, I wanted to understand more what was going on with my coworkers, with, my girlfriend, my wife, my sister. It's one way or another, they've been impacted by a female in their life and they want to know how they can work on equity, which I think is just incredible. So
Oh,
it's so
Yeah.
powerful seeing that. And it makes me so excited every single time.
Yeah. I hosted a panel for female AMEs for AME competition here recently. They turned it into a conference. And
Mhm.
that was one of the comments that were on the side. They kept saying like more men need to hear these conversations just so they
Mhm.
know, just so they
Yeah,
know what to do. And speaking of just staying on the topic of men for a minute,
yeah,
International Men's Day just passed in November 19th, I believe.
yeah.
What did you guys do for that?
Oh, we hosted a men's health symposium, and that was incredible. We had a doctor. There was a member actually of the CAF that spoke about his own experience, which was incredibly powerful. We also had a professor and a social worker as well. So it was a wide array of men's health issues. And again, it was, I would say, one of the first times that we've really just spoken honestly about it. And just being able to bring those issues to the forefront and say like, hey, it's okay, like this is what's going on, and we respect you and we value you guys. And because at the end of the day, like, we need a full team if we want to be successful, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't help just saying like everything's fine, we're not going to talk about these issues, but it just again gave a safe place to say like, hey, if you want to bring anything up. And then also to honor those men as well, right? Because we all have great people in our lives that we just
Yeah.
want to say like, hey, thank you for what you do. So it was a very great experience, and I'm so happy that we were able to do that. um, yeah, the team worked really really hard on that. We had some wonderful presenters, so it was a great seminar.
So if anyone, just before we get off the subject and dig into the gaslighting here, if somebody wants to get involved with the DWAO, if they're
Mhm.
military, who do they contact? If they're civilian, can they help? Like, can they offer if they want to be a speaker or how's that work?
Yeah, so we have a team, and so for the co-chairs, the military co-chair is myself, and I have a civilian co-chair who is Lisa Fisher. If anybody wanted the contact information, they can contact me to get everyone's contact information. And then our champion is Major Alexia Hannum. So we're kind of the three, like the trifecta of the team there. So if they just want to contact any one of us, and we can either include them into the membership. We also have virtual meetings as well. So if people want to join virtually, that's totally okay. And we do have people that join our Facebook page. I believe it's just DWO Four Wing Cold Lake. Anyone's welcome to join that. It doesn't mean that you're now a member of the DWO in Cold Lake, but you can just see, what we're sharing and talking about and commemorative events. And we also have a newsletter that's going to be coming out in the new year. But there's plenty of ways that you can participate. And if people maybe are on a base and they don't have access to a DWO, perhaps they just don't have somebody in that role just yet. We have welcomed members from across Canada to join our team just because, we're very active right now. So
Mhm.
that's also an option. So just reach
Okay.
out to any one of the three of us. So like I say, it's Lisa Fisher is the civilian co-chair, Major Alexia Hannum is the champion, and then I'm the military co-chair.
Okay. Emily, do you feel comfortable sharing your email or
Of course,
okay,
yes.
what is your email?
Yeah, so it's Emily. So common spelling, Emily.Ryman, Reiman, @hotmail.com. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. As a shift worker, I'm sure you can relate. Like sometimes I'm at work, sometimes I'm not. So
Yes, yeah. If you missed the email, rewind
yeah.
and you can get it again. Okay, here we go. Gaslighting. I'm going to read Perry's comments because Perry just made a little comment here about gaslighting
Okay,
and the
for sure.
problem that it is. So we'll start it off with that. So,
Hmm.
Perry, thanks for your comment. Perry says, this problem has existed since the dawn of man. Upper management has had great regularity, with great regularity, used it against younger workers, less educated workers, shorter workers, and certainly female workers. I am not smart enough to offer up any solutions, but I imagine if Shakespeare was told not to be a writer, or Henry Ford was told not to revolutionize the auto industry, or Bill Gates was told not to invent Microsoft, they would not. They just went ahead and did it. This problem has cost the economy billions of dollars and caused many people to seek employment elsewhere. Imagine all the great ideas that have not come to pass due to gaslighting.
Yeah.
Shameful on all those who continue on with this shameful exercise. So let's just start with that. For people who don't know,
Yeah.
what is gaslighting?
Yes. So gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation. So that in itself sounds very intense, but as we dig deeper
Yes.
into this with the examples, it'll be like, wow, like you've probably seen this at some point in your life. It makes the person, we're going to use the word victim, because really, if someone is engaging in gaslighting behavior against you, you are a victim of that. They make the victim question their own memory, their perception, their judgment, and it results in a lot of changes in that person. So, it was Perry, like Perry
Yes.
had said, like it's very damaging, and it can affect the person's self-esteem and just really start question their own reality, which is horrible. That's a horrible place to be in. So it involves destabilizing the victim and delegitimizing the victim's beliefs. So really breaking down this person, and it takes time. This isn't something that just is an immediate thing, and they're affected by it. This is a very, very slow progress, uh, incredibly damaging.
Wow. And so is gaslighting, am I the only person who's never heard of this until the last year, or is this a fairly new term?
Right. So it actually is a fairly new term, because I had thought the same thing. I was like, I feel like
Good.
there's something
I'm
wrong here. Like there's something that doesn't make sense here, but you just can't put your finger on it. And then I was walking through the airport and I saw this like very bright yellow book. I'll show it to you. And then if anyone's interested, like this is the book right here.
Oh,
And I was like, what is this? As I flipped through, I started to realize like, oh my goodness, I have seen this behavior in many different areas of my life. So it is a new term. The interesting thing about it is that there's not a significant body of research just yet, like being a new term and all. So it doesn't have a definition in the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the DSM, which is the short form for that. So it's not something that is it's not in there. So it does tend to mimic other disorders. And that also kind of makes it difficult. But some of the other disorders that it can kind of mirror are narcissistic personality disorders. But therapists that have had experience with gaslighting behavior, they have identified that there's a very unique set of behaviors that surround a gaslighter. Some of them, they're very easy to spot, and others, it's so minimal and it just flies under the radar that it's tough to spot. So that's why it makes it so important to really read up on this, because again, it's a very unique set of behaviors and there's a lot of them. So it's
okay.
not
We're
just
gonna
one.
we're gonna get into the behaviors. Trevor's
Yeah.
asking a question here. Would you consider a gaslighter's behavior as being manipulative? Can the person change, or is it the only way they know how to manage? Do they or can they respond to rational thinking?
Yeah. So I think
Good question. Both of
it's
them.
an amazing question. Yeah, it's twofold. So it's tricky because gaslighters, if you were to approach them about that behavior, like a victim of gaslighting, if you were to say, you're doing this to me, the immediate response, as a gaslighter would do, is deny it because they don't see anything wrong with their behavior. However, it's true that somebody could self-realize that they're engaging in this behavior. So perhaps through doing research, they could start to be like, oh my goodness, I see what I'm doing to people now. And I think at that point, admitting you have a problem is like the first form of help. Seeing a therapist can help. And yes, they can actually move away from that behavior, but they have to understand that what they're doing is wrong and that what their behavior is abusive and it's harassing, because at the end of the day, gaslighting is harassment. So it does take the person being able to admit that they have a problem for changes to happen.
And we were talking before about, we're going to go into the behaviors now.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking before that, people who hear this might go, oh, wow, I do that. I
Yeah.
actually do that. And maybe they're not a gaslighter,
Mm-hmm.
but they might actually. So, while you're listening to this, if you hear something and it kind of triggers something in you and say, oh, that sort of sounds like me, or I do that, you know, because we both know of examples of people who have said, oh, there was something that I did in that. So I think that's really interesting too, that you might have one or two or some of the behaviors in here doesn't mean you're a bad person.
That's right. Exactly. Because some things it's just, normal coping in life, like competitiveness in work, that's somewhat natural, right? Like as human beings, we want to try to get ahead. But you're right. It doesn't mean that you are a gaslighter if you have one thing off this list. So it's important to understand your motive behind it. So gaslighters, their motive is always to damage somebody else, is to harm someone else. And I say harm because it could potentially escalate to the point of physical violence, because like we had discussed when I did a seminar before, it was in reference to domestic abuse and gaslighting behaviors. So in those situations, absolutely gaslighting can lead to something a lot more physical. But also damaging on a psychological sense, because if you're constantly feeling like you are going crazy and you're doubting your own reality, that can be very, very damaging to the mind. So again, I would encourage people, if they're identifying things off the list that they're, I think that I'm exhibiting this behavior, I think that this is something that I'm doing, to seek professional help, to see if they can start to work on removing that from their life, because it's incredibly damaging for other people.
And so let's get into the behaviors. What does gaslighting look like?
Yes. So there is a robust list. And so I'll go through them all, and we can kind of touch on some of them in a little more detail. But if you want to kind of look at like a portrait of a gaslighter, this would be overall. And like I said, gaslighting can be found in any type of relationship. So if you consider a professor and a student, or a parent and a child, siblings, best friends, it's all kinds of relationships that you could see this in. So a gaslighter generally does not believe that they have an issue, which means that their apologies are never going to be real. So you might hear, "I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm sorry that that's the way that you saw it." It's never going to just be, "I'm sorry," period. There's always conditions attached to the apologies, and they'll refuse to take personal responsibility. So it's always somebody else's fault. So they might identify that there's a problem going on, but they certainly did not cause it. It was somebody else that did that. And they'll avoid, like I say, admitting the problems that they've caused. So they might say like, "Wow, there's a lot going on right now. I can't believe this," but they were the catalyst to this disastrous situation, but they will never admit it. They'll use triangulation and splitting. So what splitting is driving a wedge between yourself and others. So when we talk about the workplace, this can be awful if they are separating you from your peers. And splitting, again, it's creating camps of people that support them. And that's awful when you're trying to get support and make people realize that you're going through this terrible thing and there's no one around to support, because the gaslighter has manipulated them into being on their side. And also, triangulation is going through someone else to get the message across without being direct. So they might say something like, "Hey, I actually heard that this coworker thinks that you do a terrible job at blank." And so you're thinking like, "Oh my goodness, did they actually do that?" Well, the fact of the matter is that person probably never said anything at all, but it starts to seed doubt in your mind, right? Which again was the very description about what gaslighting is seeding doubt inside you. They'll use blatant attempts to curry favor. So you might see that they're sucking up to people, and it seems so obvious to you because, this person has done this, that, and the other to you, but to someone else, they can actually appear quite charming. And that's another key characteristic of a gaslighter is, to other people, they might seem like the greatest person because they are charming, they're very polite, they actually do their job very well. And but to you, they're personally attacking you and gaslighting you. So makes it even more difficult when it's only happening to you and no one else sees it. They mistreat people who have less power. This one is it's an interesting one, and it's also more of a warning sign as well. So let's say you go out for a company meal, and the gaslighter is being very rude to the wait staff or just treating them like they're lesser than. That could be a warning sign. And it's also a characteristic as well, because they've put themselves on this pedestal. So anyone that they view as being less than them, despite the fact that we're all human beings, that's a sign for sure.
Wow, that's an interesting one. When I'm at a restaurant, I usually try to convince the server to come into aviation.
Yeah, you are not a gaslighter.
Hey, what are you doing with your career?
Yeah. Come join us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So some more examples as well is that they'll use your weaknesses against you. And this one is wow. When I read about this one, I had thought of so many examples of this happening. So in the beginning, like we had said, it's very gradual that a gaslighter kind of gets a hold on you, because I mean, if you think about it realistically, if somebody was really mean to you and really cruel to you on the first time you met them, you would probably just wouldn't talk to them ever again, and they wouldn't have that control or that power. So it's very gradual. So in the beginning, if you look back, you might actually have a positive relationship with this person. So in terms of a coworker, maybe they're new or you're new, and you have a good first impression. They're friendly, they're kind to you, they're welcoming. And in those moments, you're creating a bond, you're creating a relationship, and you might reveal some weaknesses to them. An example of that might be, like, I really struggle with time management. Like, I just, I'm super excited to be here, but I just feel like it's going to be tough for me to get these projects in on time, but I'm going to do my best. And, they'll encourage you and support you, but then down the road, that will be something that they'll use to throw in your face. And using your weaknesses against you can be very hurtful, because again, it's one of your weaknesses, right? And you trusted this person with this vulnerable aspect of your life, and now they're using it against you. So that's an aspect of a gaslighter that, oh man, when I heard about that, I was like, yeah, I've had that happen, definitely. So it's using your most vulnerable moments, right?
Okay.
So again, there's like so many, but a few of the other ones is they prefer to associate with people who fawn over them. So when I was talking about the gaslighter creating camps, they're going to find people that just think that they're wonderful, because these people are going to boost them up. And gaslighters really feed off the energy of others, be it positive or negative. But with the positive energy, with getting that reinforcement that they're great, that they're wonderful, they're boosting their ego. So they're going to gravitate towards these people as a means of support, and a means of having more people against you inadvertently, which is so hurtful. They are obsessed with their image. They're obsessed with your image. And again, these are more related to intimate relationships, but sometimes it's important just to see like a holistic view of what a gaslighter is and their behaviors. They con people. They have a bad temper. And punishment doesn't affect them. This is another critical.
Sorry, what doesn't affect them?
Punishment doesn't affect them.
Punishment doesn't affect them.
Yeah. So again, this goes right back to the point that they don't think they're doing anything wrong. So if you were to try to then punish them, and if we think in terms of the military, we do use that term, like delivering punishments to people, right? It won't affect them, because in the first place, they never thought they did anything wrong. So in terms of like restoration for the crime that they've committed or the act that they've done to someone else, they don't even think it existed. So punishment isn't going to do anything except for cause resent in the person that has now given that to them. This one is also interesting too. They practice what's called cognitive empathy, and it's more of a robotic expression of empathy. So it's not real. And it'll feel not real, because, as human beings, we're able to understand when somebody is being honest with us, and when they're truly feeling empathy towards us. Like, we can sense that. If someone is being fraudulent with that, we're going to pick up on that. And that's what gaslighters do, because they truly can't feel empathy for someone else. Their whole goal is to destroy another human being. So for them to then feel compassion, it's just not there.
So is that especially like where you're comparing it to narcissism?
Yes. So that is where it would seem very similar. Because again, those traits in the narcissistic behavior are quite similar to gaslighting.
Are most gaslighters narcissists?
I honestly don't know. I would imagine that there's similarities, but I think because narcissistic personality is something that can be diagnosed, that's the difference between the two.
Right.
So a few of the other things that I think are pretty critical is that they wear you down over time. So like we had said, this might be very gradual, and it makes it harder when you look back, because it wasn't always that way. And when you are finally away from the situation, it makes it a lot more clear to you how it's kind of developed. But when you're in it, it's just so slow and insidious that you just realize, I don't know how I got to this point. And so it's very slow going. They're going to give you compliments that are backhanded, or passive aggressive. And then they project their emotions on you. So like we had mentioned, that they can have like an anger problem. So if they're angry, you're likely going to be feeling it, because they don't have any sort of management of their own emotions. And I recently did a little seminar on emotional intelligence, and it's the exact opposite of that, right? So somebody who is in tune with their emotions, they're going to understand what they're feeling so that they can be empathetic towards someone else. That's what the gaslighter is missing, because they don't care what you're feeling.
Were you on that session with Jen yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah, I was on that too. It was incredible. I'm going to try to bring her on here as well to talk about emotional intelligence, because it was such a good session.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah. And total opposite everything you're saying here.
It is, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's all I was thinking about the whole time is I thought, oh my goodness, like you would never see someone with a high, they call it EQ, which for the emotional intelligence, they would not have a high EQ because it's all about themselves all the time, which is the exact opposite of if you're trying to be an emotionally intelligent leader. So
Mhm.
yeah, those are really like that's a picture of what a gaslighter would be. So
I want to go to a question here from Trevor.
mhm.
Can a gaslighter be handpicked by a boss as a strategy to take the blame, acting as a conduit for the boss's manipulative leadership?
Wow, that's really
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
I would hazard to say yes, because like I talked about before, gaslighters creating camps.
Hmm.
So the goal is to manipulate. So if they can further use someone else to manipulate that same person, then absolutely, I think that that could be something that you would see. And that's when you're going to start to look into toxic cultures, toxic workplaces, because you just have too many places of failure at that point. That's not somewhere that I would want to work, but
Hmm.
I could absolutely see that happening for sure.
So let's move into that a little bit.
Mm,
Like you were saying yesterday, you were talking about, or the last time you did this presentation, it was about domestic violence.
yes.
And, I've definitely, like, we spoke earlier, I definitely have experience in this. And,
Mhm.
and it's so hard because you think that you can't figure out what's wrong. And then
Yes.
you apologize for mm, something that's not your fault. And I said I was in the cycle. You apologize for something that's not your fault, and then you get angry that you apologize because you shouldn't know how to apologize, and then you can feel guilty that you got angry.
Yeah.
And it's just like this circle that goes on and on and on. For me anyway, in a previous relationship. Does that same sort of circle run inside the workplace? Like, how does this gaslighting actually work in a workplace?
Yeah, I'll definitely touch on that. And I agree with you. It's you really touched on like the domestic abuse cycle, right? So it's the lead up to the incident. The incident occurs, and then there's that period of remorse on the perpetrator's behalf, and then there's the apologies on the victim's behalf, which absolutely you can see that in the workplace as well, because gaslighting behavior, whether it's in an intimate relationship or it's in a workplace, it's still having the same psychological effect on the victim. And again, with them creating or people that support them, you might not have that support from anyone else. And again, with the goal of the crazy making, which is, really what they call gaslighting, is you start to think like, am I doing something wrong? Like, no one else is experiencing this, so am I to blame here? Am I not working hard enough? Is what they say true? So you really start to doubt yourself. And yes, you actually might get into that cycle of then apologizing to the person. Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I do need to work a little harder, because no one else is seeing it. So it's difficult when you're not getting that validation from other people to say, yes, I noticed that so and so is doing that to you. Yes, I did hear them say that. If no one's around to hear it and you're the only one, and they're denying everything that you're saying, you're going to start to feel like you are going crazy. And so it's very, very tough. So when we look at gaslighting in the workplace, I do have some examples of how that might look, because it's one thing to know like what characteristics make up a gaslighter, but having specific examples for myself, at least, it really empowered me to be like, yes, I understand now that my coworker, my supervisor, my boss, they're gaslighting me, and this is what I need to do to move forward. So some examples of that would be they manipulate their coworkers and their subordinates into doing work for them, and then they'll take the credit. So it's one,
Ah,
yeah, it's one thing
interesting.
to say, like, oh, I'm just lazy and I don't want to do this today, so I'm gonna, convince you to do my work for you. It's another thing to then take the credit and say, yeah, I did the whole thing. Um, they'll throw coworkers under the bus and then refuse to take responsibility for their behavior. So there's always that denial of participation in the gaslighting behavior, right? It can appear like they're destroying your professional life. And I've had this experience actually. So prior to the military, I was in policing. So I've always been in like a male dominated workforce ever since I was 16. And when I was quite young, I was in co-op. I had someone say to me, "Your career is over. You're never going to work in this industry ever again." And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness. And when I look back on that now, that person never had the authority to say to that to me. they never had any effect over my career. So making empty threats like that, or just purposely trying to destroy someone's professional life, that's a bit of a warning sign that you could be like, something's wrong here. Something is off.
Is there
Um,
jealousy there? Is that part of the issue?
yeah, and I would agree. Like if that situation was just on its own, then absolutely we could say, this person's probably jealous. Like they look at someone who's younger than them, they're further ahead at their age than they were at their own age. Then absolutely that could be seen as jealousy. And so again, like we want to look at each thing individually, but they all have to kind of be present for it to be gaslighting. So yeah, absolutely. I'm sure some people have heard these things before on their own independently, but it's when they start to add up that you see, okay, there's something more going on here. There's something a little more at work. Like it just feels off. And I'm a huge believer of like your gut feelings. And so when you start to kind of get that feeling like something is wrong here, then that's when you should start looking into it a little more.
What do you suggest for someone who's like more on? So I always think like narcissism's over here and codependency's over here,
Mhm.
and I am definitely a recovering codependent, um, and so how do you recommend that people who are being gaslit,
Mhm.
what do they do? How do they deal with it? Like if there's no one else around to see it,
Yeah.
how do they do it? Because they're going to tend to want to take it all on themselves and feel
Mhm.
bad and apologize a gazillion times and whatever else. um I don't know if that's the healthiest thing. So like what do they do to how do they handle it, especially if
Yeah.
it's at work and it's really stressful and affecting them every day? Like
Yeah.
that is not a good environment to be in. Is
No.
sometimes the right decision to leave, find a new job?
Yes, and that is recommended if you're in a place where the gaslighter is in a position of power that you can't escape. So let's say they're in I say chain of command because
You're yeah.
military life. But if you looked at, yes, a boss or someone who
Mhm.
directly you report to, and you can't escape this person, and you've tried to bring it up and you're not getting any help from higher, let's say you've actually reported it through your workplace's means for harassment, because again, gaslighting is harassment, and you're not getting anywhere, it might be your option to leave. Because if this individual is not recognizing that they have a problem and that they're toxic and creating a toxic work environment, that it's not going to change. And when I did some research on gaslighting, all of the research said like you have to leave. And again, just referencing back to domestic abuse like situations, you have to leave. This person is not going to change. You're going to see yourself in this cycle over and over and over again. So it really stresses the importance of what you need to do to protect yourself. So when we look at ways of how can we respond to gaslighting behavior, a lot of it, if not all, is protecting yourself. It's how to keep yourself safe, and also to keep your career safe and your reputation safe as well, because they can attack that with things that are not true. So I do have some suggestions that I've
Mm.
found, like just throughout some research about gaslighting. And again, just to highlight that it is workplace harassment. So most, if not all, workplaces have a harassment code of conduct. That's something that you can look in right away. Don't doubt yourself. It is harassment. So seek that out. See if you can go that route.
Mhm.
And in saying that, you want to start documenting things. So when things are occurring, whether there's someone around to corroborate it or not, you want to start writing that down. If you want to make a voice note, however you'd like to record it, the more information you have that you can say, you know what, on this day this happened, the better it is. So start documenting over and over and over again. If you're able to have witnesses that are there that are going to support you, do that, but encourage them to put that in writing as well. And again, if possible, and I understand, some people, we work in areas where you might just have to work with this one other person. I know for myself, like I work alone, like being on shift. So it depends your workplace, but try to never be alone with a gaslighter. And if you are alone with a gaslighter, don't have important conversations about work. So let's say you find yourself alone with this person who's being gaslighting you, and suddenly they want to talk about the new project coming up. That's probably not a great time to do it because you don't have any witnesses, and that's when the abuse really occurs, right? So it would be a recommendation to always have somebody present. Another suggestion that could be quite effective if you have the means for this is schedule a weekly meeting with your boss. And it's not so much to discuss the gaslighting behavior, if you feel comfortable, absolutely, but it's more just to bring them up to speed on where you're at with certain tasks. So just to let them know, like, hey, these are the updates to the projects. Like, is there anything that you need from me? And what that does, it ensures that your name is on that work. It ensures that they know that what you're doing is true. And it really just like takes the steam out of the gaslighter because they can't now circumvent you to go to the boss and say, oh, they're not doing anything. So it's a suggestion. It's just,
I would think that that was impossible, but I actually did a project once where someone else right in front of me took all the credit, which would whatever. I mean, I didn't even correct them or anything because it didn't matter.
yeah,
But it was, I don't know, it was just this feeling of that's not true, you know?
you're still shocked, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm so glad you brought that up because a lot of times this behavior is just so shocked. You can't believe someone like the audacity, like as if they would do that, right? So you
Yeah.
might have that reaction like, did that just happen? And a lot of the gaslighting behavior, you have that reaction like, did that just happen? Am I going crazy? Like, you're really,
Am I
really,
going crazy? That's
yes.
a question, you know, I've asked
Mhm.
myself many, many times, especially in my
Yeah.
personal relationship, my past relationship. Am I going crazy? Like
Yeah.
what's wrong? Am I going, and
Yes.
I wish I knew about all this back then. It might have helped bring some more, a shorter term to the relationship.
Yes. Absolutely. So just like to go back to some of the examples, um, we had mentioned like your career is over, saying that to you. Well, if your supervisor is saying this, take this information to the next person up. So if this is like a coworker or supervisor, somebody who they can't affect your career, take this to the next person up and say, hey, this was said. Is this true? So it's okay to seek the validation on statements or claims that were made on someone else's behalf. And I think that the person would appreciate that because I wouldn't like it if someone was saying, oh, Emily said this and it wasn't true. So I would appreciate if people asked me, right? So again, that kind of takes the wind out of the gaslighter's sail as well, because now you've spoken to that person and it is not true. But just remember too that the majority of the things that the gaslighter is saying to you that other people have said is not true. It's just fuel to get you going. So you do have a choice. You have a choice of just ignoring it. Or you can just simply, like I say, you could go to the other person if you feel like that's a safe place that you can ask the person if it was true or not. And this one too, I've experienced this in the workplace a lot, and it goes back to your comment about the jealousy, right? So the backhanded comments, they could sound something like, "Oh wow, like I'm so surprised you actually finished that task," and so
Oh,
you're like, "Oh, thank you?" Question mark, because it sounds like a compliment, but again, you get that gut feeling, that that was backhanded, or, "Oh, congratulations! I can't believe you of all people just qualified." And so there's a smile on their face and you're hearing the tone, but something is off. um, Again, that in itself, that could just be someone being kind of ratty, or if it's pieced with
right.
everything else, it's a way to destroy your self-esteem, right? Because I know for myself, like when I've qualified in different things, like with the Air Force, like I've been so proud, I've been so happy, and if someone were to make those comments to me, like it would crush me. So they're all together means to really, really hurt you.
Hmm.
And again, I had made a note, like, remember to document those things. It's so important. And when you're documenting, words are important, but so are the mannerisms, so are the tones. So, write that in there. Like it all just adds like a picture about what this person is doing.
Wow. Um, okay, our time is flying
I
by the
know.
way. We have like 10 minutes left and I still have a
Oh
whole bunch of
goodness.
questions. I'm going to skim through them here and say, uh, okay, one of the questions we talked about, do gaslighters ever fail? What's
Yes.
that look
Okay.
like?
I questioned this so much when I was like first researching it, because are these people just going to keep getting ahead because they just keep manipulating people? It's frustrating, right? And if our response is we have to ignore them, well, are they ever going to, I guess, get what they deserve?
Huh.
But the answer is yes. And their biggest downfall is that they fall victim to their own manipulative behavior. And how that might look is they could overreact one day. and severely blow up a situation. And so their impulsivity, their reaction has now caused their demise. So it could come back to bite them. They could cause scenes that become out of control. So um, the question that was asked earlier, could a gaslighter then, hire or use another gaslighter to manipulate people? Yes, absolutely. But what happens when those two start to conflict? What happens now when they start to, implode within themselves? So they end up destroying themselves. Um, or simply people clue into their behavior and they're just not having it. And that just ends the fuel to their fire. So again, like the best thing to do is to ignore someone who's gaslighting. If everyone did that in the workplace, if everyone just suddenly clues in and says, yeah, this isn't right, well, they don't have any kind of control or power over those people anymore. So that would be the end of them. um, in that situation, I'm sure they might go on to do that somewhere else, but really, they destroy themselves, which is.
Where does the background come from usually of a gaslighter? Like I said again, like I've done a lot of research on the codependent side, and it could
Mhm.
be usually it's a background of you've had alcoholic parents and you've learned to kind of take care of them and that kind of thing. But where does the background generally come from for someone who's a gaslighter? Do you know?
No, that I don't know. And like I say, that there's not a large body of research out there right now for it. But I do know that gaslighters gaslight others. So, or people that have been gaslit might have a tendency to then do it to someone else because you want to fight fire with fire. So you start to inadvertently do the same things that they're doing, and I think that ties into and realize that we're doing that
Hmm.
is in those instances. But aside from that, I would have to keep looking into that or see what research comes out along the
Hmm.
years here.
What do you recommend for workplaces who
Mhm.
are listening to this? Like, do you recommend that that people should really make this aware in the company so people can start to recognize it?
Yeah, I think that like even like in the military world, like just making it known like what the harassment policies are and how you can go about reporting things and just letting people know that it's safe to do so and that it's going to be taken seriously. So opening the door to that, I think will really kind of reject a lot of this behavior. And then also for supervisors and bosses, just be aware of what's going on with your subordinates or amongst the coworkers. Start to understand if there's a toxic culture happening, and if there is, like if you see morale going down or if you see one person kind of rising and crushing others, what's the reason for that? Look into it. So I think it's really just being aware,
Hmm.
and again, just making it known how people can go about reporting these things, and reducing the stigma of reporting harassment, because that, I understand, is a very big roadblock for a lot of people.
Hmm.
But that would be one of the most effective ways in the workplace to report this behavior.
Yeah, if you're part of a workplace, getting people to come in to talk about this, or even virtually having people come in and talk about this and making this aware, even for the management level, to be aware of this so they can watch for what's happening, but even for the employees to really be aware so they can put your finger on it. Like
Yeah,
that's the hardest part is putting your finger on it and saying, no, I'm not going crazy. That's actually not right. you
right.
know so just before we go, can you just, for the people watching, can you just give us an example of what this looks like in your personal life?
Do you mean in terms of like personal relationships or?
Yeah, like kind of on your last talk and what you talked
Oh,
about.
yes.
I know that's a whole other talk, so we won't get into
Yeah.
it too much, but just a little example maybe of what that looks like on the personal side. So if people are watching this and personally they're relating it to themselves.
Yeah. So in a personal relationship, again, you're going to feel very isolated. And the reason for that is the perpetrator is probably going to be charming everyone around you. They, over time, have made you feel very isolated so that when you look for support from other people, they just don't see that person that way. They're going to be using your weaknesses against you. So bringing up things from the past that you had confided in them early, it's going to be slowly escalating. You're going to start to feel like they are no longer like your cheerleader, like they're starting to tear you down. Things that you do, nothing is right. You're just going to feel like they're very critical of you, like overly critical. They're going to demand your loyalty, but really they don't require that for everybody else. So anything that you're asking from them, they will be resistant towards. But if they have any demands, any needs, they expect it now. They expected it yesterday. So their requirements of you is not the same as what they are going to be giving to you. Um, Again, like the isolation is a really, really huge thing with gaslighters and intimate relationships because you have nowhere to turn. And they're also going to start to be spreading lies about you and just blatantly ignoring anything that you accuse them of.
Mm-hmm.
So you could literally see them doing something wrong and catch them out in that, and they will deny it. They will
Yeah.
lie. They will lie their way out of
Yeah.
it. And then, like we had mentioned, it becomes cyclical because
Yeah.
then, there'll be the blow up and then the remorse. So
Yeah. Trevor's asking, is there any difference between gaslighting in a marriage and having an abusive relationship?
oh, so they actually are, they're hand in hand. So you'll have the gaslighting behavior. Of course, like domestic abuse and domestic violence is something that it goes hand in hand with gaslighting behavior. So you'll often see them together. You could have someone who's gaslighting just on purely the emotional, the psychological side without being involved in domestic violence. But more likely than not, in an intimate relationship, you're going to see it lead into domestic violence because it starts to escalate. And that's why it becomes so dangerous for people experiencing that. And that's why they recommend you need to leave because this will escalate to the point of physical harm and even worse.
Wow. Okay. Emily, we're out of time and I didn't even get to ask a core, like 3/4 of the questions that I had written down, but I can't thank you enough for being here and for bringing awareness to this subject. And I hope that this just continues to spread. And as they get more research into it, it just spreads and it's something that we're all really aware of, and we all check ourselves and see what we can fix in ourselves, and then be aware of when it's happening to us so we can stand up for ourselves.
That's right.
And leave. And I know it can be really hard to stand up for yourself, like,
Mm-hmm.
but that's so hard, and that can cause stress in itself. But I always talk about mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine like having a mentor or someone you can talk to about this. You've mentioned counseling here today.
Yeah.
Going to get counseling is something that can help you. If you're the victim, going to get counseling to help you figure out how to stand up for yourself. There's no shame in that.
There's not
Right?
at all.
Yeah, there is no shame in that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody. Thanks again to my guest, Emily Ryman. Perry, you've made a beautiful comment here saying thank you for doing the Zoom webinars. When is your book coming out? Thanks a lot, Perry. You're very kind. The first draft is actually done. So I'm actually having fun with that. But anyway, thank you all so much for being here. ElevateAviation.ca is our website. Please sign up for our podcast, and we're going to be back next week. Can't really remember what the topic is next week, but 2 weeks from now, we're having, there's a group of pilots in Hawaii that are making Christmas special for some local people there. So we're going to have those pilots on to see what they're doing over in Hawaii. So that's going to be pretty cool. But follow our social media or sign up for our newsletter to continue to find out more about these webinars and who we're having on and when we're having them. Really enjoyed being here today. Emily, thank you again. Really appreciate it. And I will see you hopefully the next time I get to come up in Cold Lake when we're allowed.
Yes, would love to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we will talk to you soon. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Airtime. Okay, bye-bye.